Play the long game. You don't want to take shortcuts to success, because I don't think there are shortcuts. In the end, you got to live with yourself. So yeah, you're hungry. Yeah, you want to take it to the next level. And just don't sell your soul in the process. If you emerge with you intact, with your character, with your integrity, maybe with your faith, that's enough. And success will take care of itself.
Welcome back to the Mark Faris Experience. Today, guys, we have a real treat for you. We have a lawyer that turned into a pastor, that built it into a phenomenal success, flipped into leadership, and is now growing a leadership platform. He has millions of followers, and his name is Carey Nieuwhof. Carey, welcome to the show.
Mark, it's good to hang out with you here. Thanks for having me.
Well, Carey, we've been talking about doing an interview for a long time, and you're like, Mark, start a podcast. Mark, start a podcast. But I mean, I would classify you as like the godfather of podcasts. I mean, you started a number of years ago. You have millions of followers, millions of downloads, and you've interviewed some of the greats. And I have the book of one of the guys that you were able to interview. We're going to talk about how you were able to interview Jim Collins, Patrick Lencioni. I mean, the list, Seth Godin. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And so I really appreciate you coming on the show and talking about, you know, how your overall success, how you got there. But maybe first we can go back to the very beginning and maybe share a little bit about your origin story, because I find how you got into being a pastor from being a lawyer. That was just, it's an exceptional story.
Yeah. So, you know, I do have entrepreneurial genes. Both of my parents were immigrants from Holland after the Second World War. They came over in the 50s. My mom was a little girl. My dad was like 19 when he came over, and they met in Canada. I'm Canadian. And anyway, yeah, long story short, you know, that kind of immigrant hustle, came over with $20 in your pocket, was very much an imprint in my life. But what do you want to do with your life? You know, I'm sure when I was 5, I wanted to be an astronaut / baseball player / you know, firefighter, whatever happened to be, you know, what a 5-year-old wanted to do. But I remember being 8 years old, and recently, this was in Windsor, Ontario, right across the river from Detroit. I drove by the church where this happened, because I was in a church basement at Boy Scouts, Boy Cubs, whatever, Scouts, whatever age you are when you're 8. And I remember going home to my parents' place, walking into the den. This dates me. This is the 1970s, man, mid-century modern. And saying to my mom and dad, I'm going to be a lawyer when I grow up. Now, you know, it's the 70s. There's no internet. You have no way of, like, you see what's on TV, you hear what's on the radio. You have a few friends, maybe your parents' friends that drop by. So you don't have like infinite career choices you do now. But I don't know what it was about me that wanted to be a lawyer when I was younger, but that was it. And that was fixed in my brain. Did a bunch of stuff at 16, walked into a radio station, asked them to hire me. They hired me. Thought about that as a career. Did my undergrad in history, but it was really pre-law. Got into the law school of my dreams, the one that I really wanted to go to in Toronto, to Osgoode. Got in, and in between, first of all, I met my wife there. That was the best part. Second best part was between first and second year law. Again, I was a Christian, but had no intention of going into ministry. I actually felt sorry for pastors. I thought it was one of those things you did if you couldn't do anything else with your life. It's like, oh, well, I'll go into ministry. But it was kind of a supernatural event, Mark, where, and I know not everybody who listens to this podcast is a person of faith or a Christian, so totally respect different viewpoints here. But I had a vision of myself. I was at the law firm in August of 1989. I was in my early 20s, and had a vision of myself at 44, 20 years in the future. I was wildly successful, and I was like morally bankrupt, didn't respect myself, and my life had fallen apart. And it was a daydream. It was like 3:00 in the afternoon, and I saw it as clearly as I'm seeing you right now. I saw it. And somehow I knew in my spirit, law's not for me. Like I wasn't going to pursue law. I thought, well, that's weird, because this has been my life's ambition for a decade and a half. Now what? So I left the office I was in. and went into the firm's library. This is my hometown in Midland, Ontario. We had moved since I felt that call when I was 8. And I'm looking out the bay window going, what am I going to do with my life? And I felt this gravitational pull down the road to the church where my family attended on the weekends. And the only part of the church I could see from the law firm, you could still go there today and see them both, was the pastor's study. And I felt this prompting that said, you should be in there. And I'm like, what? That is so weird. And, I'm not the kind of guy who hears from God every day and, the toast burnt, so it was Satan. I'm not that kind of guy. And I was dating my now wife at that time, and we were staying with my parents that summer. So I went to pick her up. She was working down the street. We had known each other almost a year, never talked about ministry, talked about our faith, but not about ministry. We're driving back to my parents' place for dinner. Didn't say a word about what happened that day. She turns to me and she goes, you ever thought about going into ministry? And I'm like, what? Like, it's crazy. Wow. So I spent 2 or 3 years trying to think, you're a lawyer, you're logical. This is stupid. This is nonsense. It doesn't make sense. Anyway, finished up law, worked for a year in Toronto, got called to the bar, resigned, went into seminary, served a church for 20 years. In the last decade, I've been building into leaders. So that's the origin story of how I got to where I am. But like, even as I tell you that, I'm like, if I was listening to some guy saying that, I wouldn't have believed it. But that's what happened. And that's how it got me to where I am right now.
Well, I found that the most successful people, they can see long-term and be able to respond accordingly. In this case here, I mean, that vision was massive. 20 years down the road, you were able to see what your life looked like.
Yeah, I'd sold my soul.
Yeah. And, for a lot of people, I think, to actually even have that thought to say, you know what, I'm going to be looking 20 years down the road. Most people are just thinking about next week, and maybe they're thinking about a year from now. But I would say like that you had that vision was amazing. And for, entrepreneurs that are out there now that they're thinking, okay, like for me, it was hockey. I was on waivers and the door was closed and I couldn't find another team. And then it took somebody like my wife, Joanna, to say, hey, Mark, you don't have to keep playing hockey if you don't want it. And then like this vision came to me that, real estate is what I wanted. What would you say to the listeners that are maybe going down a path, they're maybe not enjoying what they're doing, but they feel like they have to do it because they've always done it? I mean, you've had that vision of being a lawyer you had it for many, many years. So do you have any suggestions for anybody that's going down a pathway that maybe is not what is on their heart, and what they can maybe do to have some, perspective? Going to churches that's amazing. And maybe there's going to be like a vision there, but is there anything that they can proactively do you think that could perhaps, give them some further insight of 20 years down the road, is this really what they want to do? And then maybe they pivot into something else.
So there's 2 things I'm thinking about in response to your question, Mark. One is I think you have to know yourself. And there's a driven, like entrepreneurs, I have an entrepreneurial spirit. There's a part of that that's really healthy, and there's a part of that that's unhealthy, right? Like it can become all about you. You can sell your soul, so to speak, to be successful. And I think I had all that in me in my early 20s. I was very driven, very ambitious. And I think it was a wake-up call. I didn't try to have the vision. It just came to me that day. In my language, I think that was God, but you can interpret it however you want. But I think that was a wake-up call to let me know you can run over what matters most in this life. And I think most of us could agree that relationships are more important than success, that, your integrity is something that once you lose is really hard to get back, takes a lifetime to build, takes a second to lose. And I think at 24, I had enough drive in me that I could have cashed out on everything that was important to get something that was not important down the road. Now I'm successful. I'll give you an example. There's a guy I know who had a big birthday, like a milestone birthday. I don't want to give too many details away in case he's listening, but 40, 50, 60, one of those things. And he won a business award and had to travel literally to the other side of the world, Europe, to receive it. And his marriage had fallen apart and his kids weren't speaking to him. And he flew to Europe alone to receive the award. And that really was haunting. And I think that could have been me, like burn all the relational bridges around you. And then there's nothing left. So I'd say there's that. What is it inside you that could go wrong if you got success? Because failure is a test of character. I think success is a bigger test of character. The second thing I would say when you think about trajectory is most of us have role models in mind, right? Like we want to be the number one real estate agent. We want to be this. We want to be, I was a pastor for 20 years. Want to be like that mega church pastor. But if you're signing up for somebody's life, or you want to be an NHL player, and they're your role model, you have to sign up for all of it.
Yeah.
Like,
good.
You got to sign up. Okay, I want their stats. I want their wealth. I want their income. But look around them. Do you really want to sign up for their quality of their relationships? Do you really want to work 100 hours a week and not have a personal life? Do you really want to let your health deteriorate like they have? Now, there are role models that are worth having who really do seem to have a lot well put together. But you have to ask that question. If you're chasing somebody, do you want all of their lifestyle and all of their character, or do you have to make trade-offs? And I'd rather have fewer listeners and fewer dollars in the bank and have the people closest to me have the best experience of me than be richer and more famous and have my boys not talk to me and my wife going, I'm on my way out the door. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. That's such great insight. And looking down, I mean, you can see people that are down the road in that success. And, I've found it even, so on the brokerage side and the investing side, the two businesses, I look down the road and I see other peers around me, and some of them have done it extremely well, and they've been able to balance. And it's like, okay, I really like how they were able to be successful and family. And then others, it seems to be, it's almost this kind of story they're telling themselves that they have to cut out family and they have to have that mindset in order to have that success. Yet I've seen an alternative do both really well, but they were the exception. They had to be very intentional with their time. And maybe they, like you had said, maybe they took a little bit off the table to make sure that they're depositing in their family along the way. And then they became successful. But, there are certain businesses where it just takes a lot of time. I mean, I know in the legal, it's coming down to billable hours, right? Mm-hmm. And so when you're going down that pathway, you could just see it, the writing on the wall. But modeling, I think, is a really good, do you want everything in that life in order to accomplish what you think is?
Yeah, you want to sign up for the whole thing, because most of us want the results. We want the stats. We want the dollar amount. We want the monikers. Can I tell you a story about billable hours, which was interesting? So this is only a year. One size may not fit all. I finished law school, and one of the reasons I finished law was criticism of a lot of pastors, if that's indeed what I was going to become, is you haven't worked an honest day in your life. You don't know what the real world is. And I'm like, no, I want to earn a paycheck for a year so that when I'm standing up there and Mark shows up at my church, I can be like, okay, I don't buy and sell houses, but hey, I pounded the pavement for a year. I kind of get what you're talking about. And I think people like you can smell it out if somebody's been living in an ivory tower, whether they know how the world's put together. So I did that year in law, but it was really interesting. I was newly married. We had been married maybe 2 years, and I was going to become a dad halfway through my year in law. And I thought, what do I do? And I had a mentor who was a year ahead of me, a friend/mentor from law school who was a year ahead of me. And Bruce worked at one of the major firms in downtown Toronto. And Bruce said, yeah, I'm just not playing the game by the rules. And he's done very well professionally. And I thought, that's what I have to figure out. Because the rules, when I was in law in the early 90s, was you put in, 60, 80, 100 hours a week. You don't see your family. I mean, there were law firms. Our firm didn't have it, but there were firms my friends were at where they had cots in the office and chefs on staff so that you didn't have to go home to sleep. You didn't have to leave the office to eat. Bill, 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 bill. So I'm like, I don't want that life. I want to stay married and I want to be a good dad. I made a deal with myself. I didn't tell anybody. When they hired me, I said, look, I'm not going to be a lawyer at your firm. I'm going to seminary after this, but I will give you one incredible year. And they hired a couple of us at that time. And one of my classmates actually got hired. He played by the firm's culture rules, which was work 7 days a week, in on weekends, stay till midnight, back at the desk at 8 a.m., work, 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 work. And I'm like, I'll get in at 7 a.m. I used to be there, as the sun's rising kind of thing. But like, I'm going home when the legal secretaries and law clerks snuck out at 4:30. I snuck out. And I'm like, I know the game is billable hours. I'm just going to be really efficient, really effective. And they threw me in court almost every day. And I'm like, I'm going to learn how to win. So I tried to figure out, how do you win a case? And what I learned is most lawyers, even with 5 years experience, are very unprepared. So you show up at court. It's like, Your Honor, I'm here on behalf of Mr. Faris. My client, Mr. Faris, is arguing about, and they didn't even know what day it was. And I'm like, okay, go prepared. And then I pretty quickly figured out, all right, I need to know I need to know my case. I need to know what my opponent is going to say, because I need to be able to counter that before they say it. And then I need to know what the judge needs to decide. So you got to figure out the game. I'm like, I think I can play this game. It's just prep. So I won all but 2 cases that year. And I was sneaking out at 4:30, 5 o'clock at the latest. Never worked a Saturday, never worked a Sunday. And I was home every night for dinner, except when I was out of town. If I was out of Toronto, out of Oshawa or London, then it might be, traffic. You don't get home till 6 or 7 or whatever. But I played by my rules. The end of my year comes up and one of the partners takes me out for lunch. And he goes, I know you want to do this dumb ministry thing. What's it going to take to bring you here? I'm like, no, I'm not interested. And he dangles this big salary in front of me. He goes, how much are they paying you in ministry? I'm like, I don't know, a fraction of that. And he's like, come on over. I'm like, no, I feel a call. He goes, that's the dumbest thing ever. So they offered me a job. And I said, why are you offering me a job? He says, you're the only student in the history of our law firm to make the firm money. You made us $100,000 this year, profit.
Amazing.
And I played by my own rules. You know what they did to the guy who worked evenings and every weekend? They fired him.
Yeah.
Because you get fried, Mark. You know that. If you're not home and you've got 3 sons and Joanna, great marriage. If you're in your office and you're uber successful, but if you're in that office, and I know you're not, you work hard, you hustle, but you're not there till 2 a.m. and then back at your desk at 5 a.m. You can't. You wouldn't be married. Your kids wouldn't talk to you. So that's a parable. And I'm not saying one size fits all. If you try that, you might get fired. But I've used that. Now, it was way harder working for myself than it was working for someone else. But that was a lesson for me, that you can make your own rules and still be successful.
Well, it reminds me of this. So Parkinson's law. So work expands to fill the time available for its completion.
So true.
This is something that, Gary, I'm so glad you brought this up, because there's a massive difference in all industries between productive work and busy work. And, in real estate, it is prevalent. You have these, agents, for example, that are working, quote unquote, they're saying 70 hours, 60, 70 hours a week, but you actually ask them how many conversations did they have with a potential buyer or seller. And it's like, you can count them on your hand in a week.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, what are you doing?
Well, nobody called me back, Mark. Sorry.
Well, it's busy work, right? And it reminds me a lot of there's a really great movie, one of my favorites is In Pursuit of Happiness. And so you see it, the main actor was done by 4:30. He had to be done by 4:30 to go pick up his son. And he was able to get all the work done. And so he played the game really well too. He went to, most of the guys started, they called the small fish first and then worked their way up to the big fish. Well, he's like, I don't have that much time. I got to
he went right for the big fish. He figured out the game really well. And he was massively successful and he got the job, but he worked way less. And so that's where if you can really condense time or have deadlines for yourself, I have to get it done, you will get twice as much work done as somebody else if you really compress it and you go hyper focused. There's another good book, Deep Work, actually, that I'm
Cal Newport.
Yeah.
I love that book.
Yeah, you interviewed him too, didn't you?
I did a couple times. Yeah.
So in that book there, it's phenomenal. It's like you can get way more done if you have this laser beam focus. You put the earmuffs on and you stay focused on the work that actually means something, that's a high leverage point.
Well, you mentioned something else too. You hinted at it that I think is really helpful, Mark, and that is docketing. Like lawyers in those days, it was a sheet of paper. Now it's all digital, right? But there was like, I had to account for every minute in the hour. So if I took an extended lunch break or bathroom break, I couldn't bill for that. And you can't work on multiple files at the same time, right? So every time I did something, it was like a 0.1, a 0.2, a 0.5, a 1.2, right? All build on the hour. So I was like, when I got in at 7 a.m., I was to work and I got to work and I would look, okay, because if you work 8 hours, you're not going to get 8 billables unless you're lying. I would get 5 to 6 billables every day that were solid. Like, yeah, we can invoice the client and I can defend this. But if you're accounting for all of those minutes, you're not scrolling. I mean, we didn't have social media, but you're not staring out the window, scrolling social media, that long lunch with, I think, I talked about this once in one of the books I wrote. You end up in this gray zone when you're at work, you're not really working because you're on Facebook Marketplace or Amazon shopping, or you're reading the news. And when you're home, you're not really home because now it's like, oh, I got to finish that deal, blah, 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 blah. So, make your work and your home life. Like, and Cal Newport talks about that, right? The shutdown ritual, where at the end of the day, if you're a virtual worker, if you're working behind a laptop like you and I do, you have a shutdown ritual to say, and maybe if you're working on, like we just did a really big deal in our company, that was like 6 a.m. till midnight for about a week. But once, deals come and go, you don't need to live that way. So you just shut the laptop down and then you're home and you're fully engaged. And then when you're at work, you're fully engaged. I think that's really important too.
Yeah. I love that reference in regards to docking it. Like, I think that can be so applicable to all businesses. Pretend you're a lawyer and actually start tracking. And you can't do 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there. You need a full, like you had said, your minimum billable hour was at 0.1 of an hour.
Yeah. So it's like 5, what would it be? I'm trying to think back. It was like 5 minutes, 6 minute increments, 6 minute increments. So, I mean, if I'm touching an email for 10 seconds, that doesn't count. But if I'm doing a reply to an email that's thoughtful and could become part of the docket, and I spend 4 minutes on it, it would docket at 6. So you're literally, and there's apps now, like you can just use Toggle or something like that. If you just Google Toggle, and it would be a good experiment for those who are not billable hours. Like, where is your time going? And you'd be surprised how much just goes down the drain.
It's a real,
for me too. I'm the worst. I distract myself on a regular basis.
Well, it's easier today than it's ever been. You got social media. I mean, it's you really need to be intentional now. That idea of single focus. And if you haven't read that book, Deep Work, by Cal Newport, I definitely recommend it. That this whole idea about single tasking for me it's been a game changer, because they say, was it 23 minutes once you break your focus and you start something else in order to get fully engaged in that next piece of work. There's like a residue from the previous work that sticks on you, and it takes 23 minutes to get back into that state again. So for me now, it's like waking up really early, and I go for long windows of time where I can put my earmuffs on and focus before like 8:30 comes for me, and it's like my day. There's back-to-back meetings, and I just found that the intensity and focus is not there the same way as in prior to.
Yeah, I love those early morning hours too. I mean, and I look at it this way, right? If you start work at 5:30 or 6 for that deep work, as Cal Newport says, It's kind of like going into a city at 5 a.m. You're going to beat traffic. But at 8:30, the trip at 5 a.m. is going to take you an hour, hour and a half. The trip at 8 a.m. is going to take you 3 hours for exactly the same distance. And that's what happens. Like, your phone will start buzzing. Other people will interrupt you. There'll be a knock at the door. Or you're going to be, but if you can do that first hour or two in the morning, and that's what I'm doing tomorrow. I'm rewriting one of my online courses. Like I got that pegged 6 to 8 a.m. I'm going to be like deep in the weeds in that online course. Those 2 hours will be worth more than 8 distracted hours.
Yeah. It's really interesting. And it's part of your book as well as at your best. You talk about these different zones, right? And so that's where, for me, that was a game changer. That book was phenomenal. And you had talked about having these productive zones. And it's interesting because I was thinking of you. So that deep work in the morning, I tried to do that same work in the evening. And I just start for 5 minutes. I'm like, oh my goodness, I feel like a different person. I was like, nothing is coming out. Can you talk to us briefly about that, Carey? I mean, it was a phenomenal.
Yeah. It's something I learned the hard way. I mean, when I was in ministry, you got a sermon due every Sunday. Try writing a 40-minute speech 35 weeks a year. That's like a lot. And then it's, same audience, so I can't use the same jokes. Okay, that's a real challenge. And that's what really forced me to take, and it's exactly what you said. Most of us are very different people at 8 a.m. or 8 p.m. We're just very different people. And I'm like you, I'm a lot better in the morning than I am in the evening. At 8 o'clock at night, I'm falling asleep. That's me. And so what I want to do is think about your day in 3 different zones. Your green zone is when you're peak productivity. You're feeling great. You're you can get to a flow state. You're high energy. Your best ideas are flowing. And that's called your green zone. And it's basically 3 to 5 hours a day is what most people have. So for morning people, that's in the morning. Some people here might be night owls. I've never been a night owl, but maybe that's 8 till 11 for you. I know creatives who will say that's the evening hours for me. Awesome. A lot of people are midday. It's like 10 to 2. That's when I'm at my best. Okay, so whatever that is, there's no right answer. You just got to figure out what your answer is. That's your green zone. The opposite is your red zone. So think about it like a stoplight, green, yellow, red. Red is when you're exhausted. 4 to 6 p.m. for me. I either need a cup of coffee, a nap, a walk, a workout, or something. But if I'm in a meeting, I'm grumpy. If you ask me a question, the answer is probably no. I just want to get out of there. Your energy is just low. And then your yellow zone is everything in between. So your yellow zone is you're not at your best, but you're not at your worst. I'm in my yellow zone right now. I can get a lot done. Like I'm pretty good. I'm just maybe not at my best. So what you want to do, you want to divide your day, like put it on a calendar, green, yellow, red. So for me, my green zone hours are 7 to 11 a.m. And you probably have some high performers who are going, you know what? I have an 8-hour green zone. No, you don't. You're going to lag. Like the human brain, and Cal Newport has done some research into this. The human brain is capable of functioning at a high cognitive level for most of us mere mortals, 3 to 5 hours a day. What I wanted to call my book At Your Best, I wanted to call it the 3-hour workday, because that's what I think most of us have, but Tim Ferriss stole that title. So, I got about 3 to 4 productive hours in a day. And then I can do a meeting, I can do an interview, I can fill out an expense report, I can do all that stuff later. But in terms of being able to ship high quality work, so most people waste their green zone. This is the big idea. If you're a morning person, Mark, you're doing breakfast meetings 4 days a week, and it would be really easy as a real estate agent or wealth management to do breakfast meetings every day. You don't have that focused time. You're then opening up the laptop at 7 o'clock. The kids are like, Dad, we want to do this. And you're like, no, I got to work. But now, and think about this. If you protect your green zone and you're like, no breakfast meetings, or maybe you do 1 day a week. Okay. Yeah. No breakfast meetings. If you get that 3 hours done, you can close the laptop at 5 o'clock, go home, have dinner with your family, be engaged. It's like, you guys want to watch a movie? Down for it. Let's watch the movie. And that was, you talk to a lot of pastors, if your sermon's written by Tuesday, it doesn't matter what else happens in the week. If you're still cramming on Sunday or Saturday, it's like probably getting a deal structure together. If that thing's done when it hits your inbox and you get that all finished, and that was your big project for the day, finished. You're done. Then you can take the meetings and the small stuff.
You feel good about it. Yeah. And this has been, and it's the important but not urgent stuff that if you can fill that in that green zone. I mean, for me, Carey, it's been a game changer. And Stephanie, my assistant, knows there's no meetings booked in the morning. It's like, other than that morning huddle for me, it's like after that, I still got another hour, but I know before 8:30, I feel that that's like golden time for me. It's got to that point now where it's just the output is just, it's not even close. And so I save that deep work for that morning. And it's just so interesting because your book nails it. Because right around 10:30, 11, I'm like, where's the creativity? Where's the ideas? It's not flowing the same way.
Yeah, you could book 2 to 5 in the afternoon. If you're a morning person, you can book 2 to 5 in the afternoon. That's my quote, fake green zone. It's not flowing, is it?
Yeah.
It's weird. The other thing you're so good at, and that's why I'm excited to have you on my leadership podcast. You're one of the very best I know, and I know a lot of people, at not just using your gift, but developing it. Like I've seen you, we've known each other for over a decade, and you've had a public profile in this area for almost 20 years, Mark. And you've been successful from a very young age. But one of the things I think you do really well, there's your day-to-day work, right? Like, oh, I got to get this done, or I got to return this phone call, or I got to put this proposal together, or whatever. But you're always like goal setting, you're reading books, you're listening to podcasts, you're growing. And I think if we can just call that gifting. All right. So some of your listeners are gifted at sales. They can just walk into a room. They can sell shoes to a cobbler. They can sell water to someone who lives by the ocean. Like they can just sell like that. But how can you become better? I'm a decent communicator. I can, if you're like, Carey, you're on in 5 minutes, you have 30 minutes, I'll fill that time. But how do I become a better communicator? So what a lot of us do is we cheat our gift because we're good at selling and we can probably close a deal. Great. We just do it. We wing it because you're good at it. And what you want to do is you don't want to cheat your gift. You want to develop it. So that means you got to figure out, all right, well, I'm going to listen to these podcasts on how to 10x my sales results. I'm going to read some books. I'm going to get around some people who are better than me, who are selling twice what I'm selling, doing twice what I'm accomplishing. I'm going to learn from them. And you can use your green zone then to not just use your gift, but to develop it. And I've seen you do that so well. I mean, you've already referenced 4 books in this podcast. You're always learning. And if you do that, that's how you rise to the top of the field, or at least that's how you develop the gift that you've been given so you get better at what you do.
Well, thank you for that, Carey. And I would say you underestimated yourself, that you said a decent communicator that you were. You have, just for the listeners, if you haven't heard Carey Nieuwhof, he has over 35 million downloads. He's a world-renowned speaker. But that's something that over the years, I know that you've really, one of the things that I've seen you do is like ask for feedback and like a constant, and you're curious as well of what other people's thoughts are. And so I know that you're like ferocious in your feedback as well, which is another part. But to add to one of the things, if I was to say one thing that maybe, because I'm not particularly this genius or anything, but one thing that I've figured out early is that more than generic learning, I like to get into like studying. And for instance, when I read a book, I'm going in to read the book to be able to extract key nuggets. And so when I'm going through, say, this book, I'm underlining as I'm going. So I'm listening with Audible and I'm speeding it up at Audible. I have the physical book and then I have a pen with the actual book. And so I find it pulls me through the book. And then I'm underlining the key ideas. And then I go back once I'm done and I pull out those key actionables and I write in the back of the book. and then I look to action on them as fast as possible. If I can take one or two nuggets and then action on it, that to me is how I've been able to maybe take concepts and apply them immediately and then see fast results. Where I think a lot of people will read, because it's interesting. I'll give the book Think and Grow Rich, for example, and they're like, yeah, I've read it. I'm like, do you have a gold card? And I have yet to, because that's the main principle.
That's like lunch and dinner with Mark, guys. Just so you know, that's what you're signing up for. Okay, if you get together with Mark.
But
I love it. But that's what makes you so good. That's developing your gift, not just using it. And you're one of the very finest I've ever seen at that, Mark. I mean,
well, it means a lot coming from you, Carey. Thank you for that. So, Carey, I want to transition the conversation a little bit to, you had enough courage. You were on the path. You're a successful lawyer. You made the transition where you started completely from scratch. And so you started as a pastor, and you went to some small little village, and you started with, it was pretty phenomenal how you started with really nothing. And, I know with the Lord's blessing, you were able to take it and grow that church. And so that's one of the Connexus, actually. That's the church that we attend as well. And you were able to build it into thousands. And I know, like, the Lord has his blessing on you as well through that. But can you take us through some of the main principles you followed in order to scale and grow such a massive community, and successful as well? That you were able to transition out from that and is still growing with strong leadership. So you built, we'll call that a level 5. You were a level 5 leader. You're able to transition out, and the company continued to grow. Can you share some of those main principles and how you did that?
Sure. First of all, a lot of grace, as you said. I made a ton of mistakes. As a Christian myself, grace of God is all over that. But looking back at it, we did start almost from zero. In fact, some people would say it was almost a negative place, because I started with 3 very small churches, which are like, the buildings are still 10 to 15 minutes from where I'm sitting here. We've been in the same community for 3 decades. And long story short, they hadn't grown in decades. Like, I got there in the 90s. They hadn't grown since the early to mid 20th century, and they were hanging on by a fume. So some of you, maybe bought businesses that were almost run into the ground. It would be like that, And I remember asking someone, when was the last time someone like just showed up spontaneously on a Sunday? And they're like, I don't know, like maybe 1983. And I'm like, whoa, okay, we have a problem here. So, part of it was just helping them see through. I said to them, I don't know how to be a pastor. I was supposed to be a lawyer. So I'm here like, I don't know what I'm doing. Okay, I'm going to seminary. It's helping a little bit, but not a lot. And I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. And I said, with all due respect, I don't think you guys know what you're doing, because the lights are almost out here. So why don't we figure it out together? And we just started reading the Bible and praying. And then I said, what if we created a church? Like, you guys are supposed to be the body of Christ. I'm supposed to help you. What if we created a church that your kids and grandkids would want to come to? Because I was 30 and they were like 70, 75 years old. I said, so we know what's going to happen if this continues. It's lights out. Last one out the door, turn off the lights. I said, what if we just created a church that your kids and grandkids would want to come to? And then that kind of sparked a little bit. And I looked for like people who were leaders. And often when you get into an existing organization, the people in leadership are not leaders. They're just loyal. They were there for a long time. And so they're like, I don't want this to die on my watch, so I guess I'll be on the board. But I started to look for like, who's leading in their community? Who's the mom who's organizing all the other moms? Like Joanna would have been a great, and who's the real estate agent who's actually selling homes? I would have picked you guys out of the crowd, and you probably wouldn't have been on the board. And then we started to do like a leadership transition to the next gen, and people started showing up almost overnight, which was great. We got out of the buildings that we were in originally because we outgrew 1 or 2 of them, went to an elementary school. Then we built a brand new facility. Then we transitioned and planted over again into a non-denominational church. And by that point, the next real barrier I hit around 200, it was, and this has business parallels because I've done talks to business leaders before, Mark. And it's interesting. I was with a friend of mine who sold his company last weekend, and he said something. There's 28 million small businesses in America. Do you know how many have revenues of over $1 million a year? About 1 million. Oh, wait, maybe it's 280 million. Anyway, it's like 10% have revenues of over $1 million. That's it. 90% of businesses never go past $1 million in revenue, which is interesting. I got my stats messed up a little bit. But the same problem, the average church stays under 200 people. And the reason it stays under 200 people is because the pastor does everything. So a lot of people in business, it's like, well, it's a mom and pop shop. I want to run everything. So they're running everything all the time. And that doesn't scale. So I said to the church, hey, you guys are going to have to figure out how to care for each other. I got to focus on preaching and leading. So we went through that transition. The next one I hit was we were approaching about 1,000 on the weekend and passing the $1 million mark in givings. And I had delegated and designated a lot of stuff to the rest of the staff. We had staff by that point. But at that point, I was still in on too many decisions. I said everything has to go through leadership team. And that took me a couple years longer to break that growth barrier than it should have. But I was still overestimating my importance to the church. So I kind of had to really empower our leaders. So I created this matrix, and the next growth barrier, which would be around the $1 million mark for a lot of companies, it was about the 1,000 attendance barrier for our church, was if it's on mission, if it's consistent with our strategy, and if you have the budget for it, you don't need to ask anyone for permission. Just go for it. But if it's off mission, a different strategy, or you don't have the money for it, then come talk to us. So that freed up decision making. We broke the 1,000 barrier. And then the other transition that I really was very passionate about, because my parents ran a business for years and they could never find a successor to take over for my dad. I was supposed to be that successor. So this was really close to my heart, and they did well. They wound the business down and everything, and they did fine with it. But that was really close to me. And I've seen a lot of churches and a lot of businesses, something like 90% of businesses fail, like shut down after their owner retires because they couldn't find a successor. And I didn't want that to happen to the church. It got way bigger. By the time we had like 1,100 attending and 3,000 or 4,000 who called our church home. So I'm like, I don't want to blow this. So there's 3 levels of businesses. I call it level 1. And this is true for churches. Level 1 is nothing runs without you. That was me in the small churches. If I took a week off, church almost didn't happen. You got to get out of that. And every mom and pop shop is a level 1 company. Nothing runs without you. As they often say, right? If you can't, if your business can't run without you, you don't have a business. So, that's level 1. Level 2 is things run without you. In other words, you can take a vacation. You could even take a month off, and maybe you could do a sabbatical, and everything runs just fine. Your company is selling houses. They're doing business. The restaurant stays open. The church is running. And when you come back, everything's in pretty good shape. Like, it's fine. But the third level, very few businesses ever get to. And the third level is things grow without you. And I was determined to get to that third level. So about a decade ago, we were at a place where we had moved into, we had replanted the church in 2007. In 2014, we built out our broadcast location, and I had an executive pastor that was doing an incredible job. And I said, okay, you run this. And it was a test. It was to see whether he could really stand up under leadership. And he did a beautiful job. He came in, you've been at that building so many times, Mark, but it came in under budget, on time. I thought, he's ready. So 6 months after we opened the building, I was turning 50. He was turning 40. I just said to him, Jeff, I think you're the guy. Are you willing to take it over? And I knew that we had a couple years in the bank. And what I meant by that is we were in a good cash position. Our debt was not unreasonable. It was very manageable. And we were at double-digit growth. So if Jeff had, rather than handing him something limping that was past peak, I could hand him something that if he had some difficulties in year 1 or year 2, he had some margin. It wasn't going to fall apart. He didn't need the margin. He did great right out of the gate. So a decade later, it's stronger and bigger than when I led it, and I'm thrilled.
There's so many nuggets there, Carey, with that story. I'm just going to do a quick, super high-level summary. So first, you set a mission.
Yeah.
Let's create a church that unchurched people would like to attend. It was very clear, and it was simple enough for people to grasp or, get their heads around it. Then you went in and you selected some leaders within the community that could be community leaders or that were already doing it. So not that you could train up. They were actually doing it. They were leading without a title. It's just you went in and designated a title to them, whereas maybe the previous leaders just didn't see it. Right?
That's fair. That's a good summary. And they were often leading in the community because they weren't allowed to lead in the church. So I would just see who is actually, and you can tell a leader because a leader has followers. So as long as they were leading something and they had followers, I'm like, Mark and Joanna, they're probably, they would definitely be leaders. I would look for people like you or the version that would show up in those early days. We didn't have people like you when I started.
What else when you're looking for leadership? What else? So they're already leading. Are there any other traits that they have when you're selecting those leaders to pull them into the organization?
Character, for sure, that they had to be people you could trust. And then alignment with the mission and vision. They would have to be on board with creating a church that unchurched people loved, or as I would phrase it at the time, creating a church, your kids or grandkids would want to attend. Now, often these were next gen leaders. These were my peers. These were people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s that I was looking to. So it's like, do you want to create a church that your friends would love, that your kids will want to stay in when they're teenagers? It was that kind of thing. So I was looking for character, and then I was looking for alignment around the vision, because when you inherit a legacy church or a legacy organization, often the past seems more appealing than the future, right? The future is unknown. So if they wanted to go back to the way it was back in the day, they probably wouldn't be the right people. But if they had great character and they had some energy and they were already leading in the community, whether that was in business or whether that was, they were entrepreneurial or they were just coordinating stuff in their community, it would be like, you have the chops to lead here. Come on in. We'd love to deploy you. And leaders love to be tapped on the shoulder. They really do, right? Yeah. Like you love someone's going to tap into my expertise. This is great.
Oh, it's so good. And that reminds me of the story when they would interview people to join Apple. They said if they didn't have in their eye, if they weren't really lit up about what it is that they were doing, then they wouldn't hire them. And so that to me is so important, especially on the leadership side. That's when you're doing an interview with somebody and they don't know anything about your company and they're just applying for a job. It's probably not your leader, but somebody that's like, listen, I've already done my research. I love what you guys stand for. Like I'm lit up. I'm all in on that. That's somebody who would be.
I want to be full out for you. Yep.
There you go. Perfect. So you select and then you started delegating as well. And then you created values for them to be able to make quality decisions that were consistent.
Yes, we had to get stuff on paper so that we were all, quote, singing from the same hymn book. We were all, you have values for your company. I have them for mine. But those values really determine, and we had different iterations of values. They're a lot more clear and articulate today than they were back in the day. But it was sort of like, this is what we're about.
Yeah. And then you found the leader and you gave them a project for them to be able to spread their wings for you, about to identify how they did. And then you did the slower transition. It was a couple of years. It wasn't like this overnight thing.
No, and that's a good point. You have to give people on ramps and off ramps because not everybody's going to make it. So if you give them, I like your word, project. We started doing like a summer kids ministry right away. We needed a ton of volunteers to do it. So I was kind of subconsciously watching to see who's really rising to the occasion here. And that was only like a 1 week project, probably 3 months from start to finish. But it was a week of like inviting kids in and that kind of thing. So I was really like kind of auditioning people to see who the keepers were.
Oh man, if you just follow that formula as an entrepreneur, if you just follow exactly what Carey did and take those steps, you're we'll say the probabilities of your success go up dramatically. It's just copy a proven model. And that model can play over and over and over. And it's, you see these companies and they just follow, it's a blueprint. Or
well, a modern iteration of that now, when we hire now, it's not just the interview process, and we do multiple interviews and we do tons of like assessments and character tests, etc. But we actually give them a project, like a simulation, and we time them on it. And if I'm hiring an EA, it's like, book these flights for Carey, set up the complete itinerary, pick the hotel, here's our criteria, here's our guideline, go. And then we see how many roadblocks they hit, whether they do it well. They say they can use Asana. Do they actually know how to use Asana? Did they say they can use AI? Do they actually know how to use AI? Or was that just something on their resume? So we simulate a number and we pay them for it. But think about how inexpensive that is now. Like if you have to pay somebody $500 to do a project versus you onboard them and you pay them $70,000 a year and then you got to fire them 6 months later. Like that $500 is the cheapest insurance you're going to buy all year.
It is phenomenal. And, it actually, in the past when we've done that, we actually had one for senior position. And she was actually appalled that we actually asked her to do a simulation. We're like, were you? But she was appalled. And it was like she was wasting her time. So I was like, very clear no. And then on the opposite end, our new head of sales, we actually gave him a presentation with the script and said, part of your last interview is a role play for you to internalize this presentation and present it. And so he did it with like so humble, and he threw his heart and he just nailed it. After that, I'm like, oh man, I'm all in with you. You're amazing.
So here's a line. If you're beneath the work, you're also beneath, then this job is beneath you. You're probably right. You don't need to work here, right?
I like that. So last thing before we go, because I know we got to finish up on time here, Carey, but networking. Okay, so you've interviewed some of the biggest names in the world. And so the people that nobody else can get conversations with. So Jim Collins would be right up there. Patrick Lencioni, the guy, Seth Godin, like these guys are the top of the top. For the listeners out there that want to get in and maybe have conversations with certain people, how were you able to get Jim Collins, for example, to have a podcast interview? And what advice would you give for anybody that wants to maybe grow their network?
Sure. So I would say I didn't start with Jim Collins. I've been podcasting for 10 years. But what I did was I kicked off the show with the biggest large church pastor I had a relationship with and kind of cashed in a favor. And I remember being very nervous at the time. We were in his network. His name's Andy Stanley. Some people listening might know him. And Andy was my first guest. So that helped. If I had Andy, who's very well known in my space, then I can say to somebody else, oh, we've had Andy as a guest. It's like, oh, if you had a Mark Faris on, then it's safe for me to do the show. So what I did was, I can't remember, but when you get a certain size audience, publishers start reaching out to you. Now, Jim Collins is not going to reach out to you probably, but when you get like everybody, if you look at the back, okay, take a look at Cal Newport's Deep Work and look at the jacket. On the back, it didn't look like he had the jacket on, but you'll see all of his endorsers, right? Hint, this is a cheat code. Those are Cal's friends. So who's on the back there?
He's got Daniel Pink, Adam Green, Seth Godin, Matthew Crawford, Derek Sievers.
Okay, so those first three names, all of those have been podcast guests, and they all talk to each other. So if you get Daniel Pink, I think was the first one I had on, and Dan knows Malcolm Gladwell, who knows Seth Godin, who knows Adam Grant, who knows Simon Sinek, and all those people have been on my guest list, my podcast. So if you have a bad experience with Daniel Pink, he's going to tell his friends, don't do Carey's show. It's a disaster. So what I did was, I think it was probably a publicist that reached out for Dan. I want to make sure Dan has a great experience. So before every guest comes on, I tell them, look, this is not the show where you get canceled, okay? If you say something, you make a mistake, you regret it, please let me know. It's not live. We'll cut it out. So that was one thing. Now, when I go to Jim Collins, I was like, hey, we've had Seth Godin, Adam Grant, Malcolm Gladwell, Amy Edmondson, Susan Cain. Like I try to figure out who their friends are. William Ury. I just had William Ury. That was a cold call. But I read William Ury in law school, didn't even know he was still writing books. I'm like, hey, I've read you since law school. It was a cold call. He said yes. Well, William Ury and Jim Collins are really good friends. I knew that because I listened to other things. So I send my pitch to info@jimcollins.com or whatever the email was. Now, I caught a break because the person at info@jimcollins.com knows my podcast. I get an answer right back right away. Carey, I listen to your podcast. I love it. I think Jim would be a great fit, except he's not doing interviews, and I don't even know how to ask him the question right now because he's working on a research project. So her name is Melissa. Melissa, if you're listening, shout out. You've been amazing. Yeah. So I said to Melissa, wow, that's incredible. Great. And that's how it happened with Malcolm Gladwell. Malcolm Gladwell's info@malcolmgladwell.com was a podcast listener. And they're like, Malcolm would be great for your show. Next week, I'm on with Malcolm Gladwell. So, when you get a platform, it helps. But it took a year for Jim. So I said to Melissa, listen, no pressure. This is a long play. If it takes 6 months or a year, I'm in for it. When is there a good time to check in again? Yeah, check in the fall. So diarized it in the fall. Hey, just checking in, seeing how things are going. He's still got his head down. He's really busy working on a project, not doing interviews. Cool. No problem. Anything I can do for you? Actually, I want to meet this person and this person. Sure, let me introduce you. Is it all right if I check in a few months? Yep. So then it got down to, Jid, this might be a better time to ask. I don't know. Maybe we should just wait a little bit. I'm like, great. Want to check in next month? Just play the long game. Weird. So to speed up the story, I check in and she goes, I think he might do it. If you were to interview him, what would you want to ask? She said, do you have any special occasions? I'm like, actually, our 10th anniversary is coming up. Okay, that always he always loves to help people out on a special occasion. If you were to interview him, what would you interview him about? And can you send 6 sample questions? I'm like, sure. So at that point, I'm like, all right, I'm going to be myself. I know I'm supposed to say good to great or great by choice, but my favorite Jim Collins book is How the Mighty Fall. So I'm like, all right, hey, just so you know, if I interviewed him, I'd really want to focus on How the Mighty Fall. It's my favorite book. I've recommended it to so many friends. Here are 6 questions. Get an email back a week later. Jim's favorite book that no one ever asks him to talk about is How the Mighty Fall. I think this is going to happen. So then we set it up. And when Jim was there, he was the best. So focused, so dialed in, so like present, had done his homework. When he shows up, he's in. We had a great conversation about that. And he goes, this is one of my favorite books. Nobody ever asked me about it. So thanks for asking. So that's how that happened. But do you see how long that took? Let's play the long game, dude.
100%. And just for the listeners, because I know they're probably thinking, what episode? Do you know off the top of your head what episode?
Oh, I can find out. I'll have it by the time we're done.
We'll put it in the notes actually here, but so it's interesting. So the long game, 100%, but you were all about giving as well. There was, what kind of value can I give you? And it was not like, okay, you're not getting me in, screw you sort of. It was this long game that you were playing, and then you were following through as well. But the biggest thing is that you actually reached out, I think.
I did. Yeah. You gotta take the initiative.
Yeah.
I don't have an episode number. I guess we're not publishing them anymore, but it's September 20. Oh, there it is. 678, episode 678.
Yeah, definitely.
678 of the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast, September 24th, 2024. But you know what? The other thing is too, always give them an out. The end of every email that's a cold call is like, hey, Mark, if this doesn't work out, I'm going to continue to follow your work. I'm very grateful for what you do. Thank you so much. When you give them an out, people tend to lean in. When you're like, here's why you need to be on my show. Yeah, that doesn't work particularly well.
Yeah, no. And I think that there's a different mindset of, instead of closing them for the podcast, for you, it's like, how do I build a relationship?
and with them. And when you build a relationship, it's not a yes or no. It's like maybe this isn't the right time right now. And so I really like that idea about giving them an out with that, and giving that way they're not feeling, okay, if I say no, I'm saying no to you, and the relationship now is severed.
Right.
Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah. And a lot of them have become friends. Like Seth Godin he's been on 3 or 4 times. We're probably going to see each other in New York this year. Like a lot of them, because they know you're safe and you're not there to get a headline for clickbait or something like that, and you prepare and you ask questions, they'll want to come back. And, some of them have become like people that I talk to on a semi-regular basis. It's been great.
Amazing. Carey, I could keep talking to you for hours and hours.
Feels like we just started, dude.
Yeah, I know.
It's great.
The hour flew by here. So we got quick rapid fire here. I got 3 quick questions here for you, and then wrap it up. You ready?
Yep.
Out of all the books you've read, what's the book that's had the biggest impact in your career?
Probably How the Mighty Fall. I would put it in the top 10. It is, he's got 5 principles. The first is the hubris born of success. For those of us who can get addicted to success, it can lead to pride. And I think humility is the key to longevity.
So good. All right. 3 words that others would describe you as.
Say, hopefully, caring, thoughtful, kind. Might add driven to the list.
Definitely driven.
Yeah.
Definitely driven. Pretty amazing. Yeah, no, what you've been able to accomplish. And then final question here. What advice would you give an entrepreneur that is either starting off in their business, or maybe they want to take their existing business to the next level?
Play the long game. You don't want to take shortcuts to success, because I don't think there are shortcuts. In the end, you got to live with yourself. So yeah, you're hungry. Yeah, you want to take it to the next level, and just don't sell your soul in the process. My wife, Tony, and I, we were looking at where we've come over the last decade. And I'm like, I would like to pretend to be smart enough to have charted this success, but I'm not smart enough. And what's best is we've actually grown closer as a couple, and our relationships have grown tighter. And that's what matters most. If you emerge with you intact, with your character, with your integrity, maybe with your faith, that's enough. And success will take care of itself.
Yeah, so good. And I mean, you and Tony, you guys have been phenomenal friends. And one thing that with all of your success that you've had, Carey, and all the impact that you've had, you've been able to remain humble throughout that whole period, and as such a giver as well, one of the most generous people that I know. So really appreciate you coming on the show. The listeners out there, if they wanted to maybe find out a little bit more about what you're doing today, maybe you could share what they can go to in order to find out a little bit more.
Yeah. So you're listening or watching a podcast, just look up Carey Nieuwhof, impossible to spell, but Carey, and then any attempt at Nieuwhof, Google will help you find us. Nieuwhof for the purists and anybody who's got a Dutch background. Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast. Also Carey Nieuwhof on YouTube and on Instagram, and careynieuwhof.com.
Amazing. Carey, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Appreciate you, Mark. So grateful for you and Joanna and your friendship, and the way I keep learning from you. You're a gift.
Right on. All right, guys. Well, thanks for listening to the show. If you liked it, go ahead and please subscribe and share the channel, where we are building a community of up-and-coming entrepreneurs. If you are interested in investing in real estate, you can't find any great deals out there. We are getting very close to our next acquisition, which we are buying these large apartment buildings. Actually, in Atlanta this year, we're identified a couple of properties right now. If you're interested in learning more, go to fariscapitalpartners.com and get on our short list to find out about that next deal. And just remember, the fastest way to build wealth is to grow your business and invest into real estate. I love you guys.